A car dealership abruptly closed its doors today, leaving already frustrated customers wondering what to do next.
America's car dealerships are collapsing in plain sight. Shiny lots filled with unsold cars, dust gathering on models that should have been gone months ago, and a growing sense of panic spreading across the industry. The story isn't just about bad luck or consumer hesitation. It's about the collision of greed, broken trust, and rules that pulled the curtain back on practices many dealers would have preferred to keep hidden. What's happening right now could determine which car brands survive, which ones vanish, and how much you'll pay if you step into a showroom over the next 6 months. Today, we'll take you deep inside the unraveling of America's dealership model. From the rule that lit the fuse, to state prosecutors turning up the heat, to the pandemic boom years that shattered trust, and the new wave of direct-to-consumer disruption rewriting the rules. Each chapter reveals how an industry that once looked untouchable is suddenly fighting for survival. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. For decades, car dealerships thrived in the shadows of complexity. Prices were rarely fixed. Extras were baked into contracts without much scrutiny, and add-ons like phantom etching or nitrogen tyre fills quietly padded profits. It was a system designed less around transparency and more around keeping customers guessing. When the Federal Trade Commission finalised what became known as the Combating Auto Retail Scams Rule, or simply the CS Rule. On paper, the CS Rule seemed like a victory for everyday drivers. It required dealers to advertise a true offering price, the actual cost of a vehicle, including every mandatory fee. It banned junk charges for services that provided no real value, and it demanded explicit, documented consent before any optional add-on could be sold alongside the car. In short, it was meant to make the car buying process clear, honest, and free of hidden tricks. But inside the industry, it landed like a bombshell. Dealers didn't just rely on sticker prices, they relied on the margins hidden in fine print. Those optional extras often generated more reliable profit than the vehicle itself. Front-end margins on new car sales were razor-thin, sometimes a few $100s per unit. It was the financing, warranties, and quietly packaged add-ons that kept the lights on. Stripping those away wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was an existential threat. Dealer lobbyists immediately sounded alarms. They warned that compliance would bury smaller operations under mountains of paperwork and legal exposure. Larger dealer groups whispered that front-end profits would collapse as soon as the rule took effect. The fear wasn't exaggerated. With every contract scrutinised, every fee questioned, the room to manoeuvre shrank overnight. Dealers suddenly had to face consumers with open books, something they had avoided for generations. What made the CS rule even more disruptive was the cultural shift it symbolised. For years, regulators had hesitated to challenge the dealership model, seeing it as a stable cornerstone of the American economy. This rule was different. It wasn't just regulation. It was a flashlight pointed into every corner of the showroom. By forcing transparency, the FTC signalled that the old way of doing business was no longer acceptable. In private meetings, some dealership owners admitted they would have to overhaul their entire business models if the rule stayed in place. Others quietly braced for closures, unable to imagine how they could operate profitably under the new conditions. Margins were already tight from rising interest rates and slower sales. The CS rule looked less like consumer protection and more like a wrecking ball aimed straight at their foundation. The fallout was immediate. Panic rippled across the industry, with some dealerships even halting new investments in facilities or staffing until they knew how hard the rule would hit. To customers, the change seemed like a long overdue correction. But inside the industry, the narrative was very different. For many dealers, this wasn't reform, it was survival. And yet, just when it looked like the rule would reshape the market for good, a surprising twist threw the story into chaos. In late 2024, a federal court vacated the CS rule, wiping it off the books. Dealers exhaled, thinking the nightmare had passed, but they were wrong. The real battle was only beginning, and this time, it wasn't happening in Washington. It was spreading to every state across the country. When the federal court vacated the CS rule in late 2020, many dealers thought they had survived the worst of it. Relief spread through boardrooms and back offices as compliance teams shelved their training manuals and owners convinced themselves that business could go back to normal. But what looked like a reprieve turned into something far more complicated, and for some, far more dangerous. That's because while the federal government stepped back, state attorneys general stepped forward. The debate over hidden fees and deceptive add-ons had already drawn public attention, and state-level prosecutors saw an opening. They didn't need the FTC's authority to act. Most states already had broad consumer protection laws on the books, and now there was political momentum to use them. The results came quickly. In Rhode Island, a dealership group agreed to pay more than $1 million to settle allegations of hidden fees and deceptive practices. In Arizona, the Attorney General secured $2.5 million in restitution from another chain accused of using add-ons that customers hadn't agreed to. And in Illinois, things escalated even further. State prosecutors extracted a staggering $20 million settlement from a network of dealers accused of widespread junk fee schemes. These weren't one-off cases. They represented a new pattern of enforcement. State officials, often with ambitions for higher office, realized that cracking down on dealerships played well with voters. The image of protecting ordinary families from dishonest sales tactics was politically irresistible. For dealers, this was in some ways worse than the original federal rule. At least with the FTC, there was one set of national standards. State-level action created a patchwork of rules and expectations. Multi-state dealer groups suddenly had to navigate a maze of differing compliance requirements. Practices that might be legal in one state could draw lawsuits in another. The cost of staying compliant skyrocketed, not just in fines, but in legal fees, compliance audits, and constant staff retraining. And unlike the FTC, state attorneys general didn't need to play by national timelines. They could pick a single dealership, make an example of it, and splash the headlines with multi-million-dollar penalties. The message was clear. The era of hidden fees and padded contracts was over, even without the CS rule. For customers, the results were mixed. Some welcomed the aggressive enforcement, seeing it as long overdue justice. Others worried that dealerships, facing mounting fines and costs, would pass the burden back onto buyers in new ways: higher sticker prices, reduced trade-in values, or more restrictive financing offers. The industry quickly realized that the fight was no longer in Washington. It was in every state capital, every courtroom, and every Attorney General's press conference. Dealers who thought they had dodged a bullet were now facing a death by 1,000 cuts. And while they scrambled to adjust, another storm was already brewing: the fallout from the pandemic's pricing frenzy. Between 2019 and 2022, car prices in the United States skyrocketed. On the surface, the causes seemed obvious: global supply shortages, disrupted shipping lanes, inflation in raw materials, and higher labour costs. But economists who dug deeper pointed out a more uncomfortable truth. Much of the surge wasn't just supply and demand, it was dealerships themselves. During those years, demand far outstripped supply. Consumers lined up for trucks, SUVs, and hybrids, and many were willing to pay whatever it took. Dealers quickly realised they could throw the old pricing playbook out the window. Sticker prices, once seen as ceilings for negotiation, suddenly became floors. Many dealerships added thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, on top of the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Stories poured in of customers paying $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000 over MSRP for in-demand vehicles. Pickup trucks that once came with discounts were suddenly commanding record premiums. For dealerships, these were boom years. For consumers, they were years of frustration and resentment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics eventually confirmed what many suspected. Dealership profit margins had expanded significantly during this period, making auto retail one of the quiet winners of the pandemic economy. But those numbers came with a cost: public memory. Even as supply chains normalized and inventories rebounded, consumers didn't forget how they felt during the markup frenzy. Many believed they had been taken advantage of when times were toughest, forced to pay inflated prices simply because they had no choice. That lingering anger became fertile ground for regulators, lawmakers, and consumer advocates. Every crackdown, every lawsuit, every new rule was easier to justify when framed as protecting buyers from pandemic-era profiteering. The trust that once underpinned the dealer-consumer relationship was badly damaged. Before, car buying was a game of negotiation, with both sides expecting a little give and take. After the markup boom, many customers felt the game had been rigged entirely against them. They were no longer just negotiating, they were being squeezed. This breakdown of trust became one of the most powerful drivers behind today's dealership crisis. It wasn't just about economics, it was about perception. Dealers who had profited during the boom now faced reputational damage that couldn't be repaired with a simple discount. Buyers walked onto lots, skeptical, suspicious, and in some cases openly hostile. That shift in sentiment created an opening for lawmakers to push transparency, for states to prosecute, and for alternative models like Tesla's direct sales to gain traction. In short, the pandemic years didn't just pad dealer profits, they planted the seeds of the industry's current collapse. For decades, American car dealerships enjoyed something no other retailer could claim: legal protection. State franchise laws ensured that automakers couldn't sell directly to customers, forcing them to go through independent dealers. These laws were originally framed as consumer protection, preventing powerful manufacturers from undercutting local businesses or manipulating markets. In practice, they created a protective fortress around dealerships. Within that fortress, dealers enjoyed exclusive territories. They controlled pricing in their markets, shielded from direct competition. Customers could only choose between dealers, not between the dealer and the manufacturer. It was a system that preserved margins, stabilized operations, and entrenched the dealership model as a permanent fixture of American commerce. But that fortress is starting to crack. Transparency rules, even in states where the CS rule itself never took hold, are eroding the value of exclusivity. When every potential buyer can see a dealer's full price online and instantly compare it with others across town, or even across state lines, the leverage of geographic exclusivity diminishes. Industry analysts warn this is about more than pricing. It's about control. If consumers can shop nationally with a click, the justification for franchise territories begins to fade. And if automakers see diminishing value in their dealer networks, they may push harder for direct sales, especially in the electric vehicle market where new models are being introduced rapidly. For dealers, the threat is existential. The very laws that once guaranteed their survival are losing their power in the face of digital transparency and shifting consumer expectations. While dealers still hold political sway in many state legislatures, public sentiment is shifting against them. Buyers burned by pandemic markups and emboldened by new transparency laws aren't sympathetic to the old argument that dealers protect communities. The fortress hasn't collapsed yet, but the walls are crumbling. Every lawsuit, every enforcement action, and every click of a consumer comparing prices online chips away at the foundation. Dealers once shielded by legal protections are now being dragged into the daylight, and what's being revealed isn't flattering. The next phase of this unraveling wouldn't come from legislation or lawsuits alone. It would come from the lots themselves, once symbols of constant motion, now transformed into eerie graveyards of unsold cars. Across America, dealership lots once filled with a steady churn of vehicles now look more like long-term storage yards. Rows of brand new cars sit under the sun, their glossy paint fading, their tyres still pristine but untouched. Some have been parked for months, others for more than a year. In certain locations, seasonal changes have become more noticeable than customer turnover. A sedan that rolled in during the spring now wears a light coat of autumn leaves. A truck that arrived in winter still hasn't moved, its windshield collecting dust while salespeople shuffle it from one side of the lot to the other to keep up appearances. The image is striking. Cars designed to symbolise mobility, progress and freedom, stranded in perfect rows, going nowhere. These are not display models or special orders, they are vehicles waiting for buyers who may never arrive. The frozen lot phenomenon isn't evenly distributed across the industry. Some brands still move inventory quickly. Step onto a Toyota or Hyundai lot, and you'll see cars disappearing almost as fast as they arrive, snapped up by buyers who trust the reputation of those brands. For Toyota, value and dependability keep demand high. For Hyundai, aggressive pricing and technology-forward offerings drive interest. In both cases, consumer confidence translates into sales velocity. Contrast that with luxury brands like Audi and Jaguar. Their showrooms are eerily still. The same SUV you admired on your last visit 2 months ago is likely still in the same spot. The sports sedan that once turned heads at launch is now a familiar sight, gathering dust under showroom lights. The prestige that once sold cars on name alone is proving less effective in an era where buyers weigh price against long-term value. This divide tells a deeper story about trust and consumer behaviour. Brands that built reputations for reliability and affordability are still finding buyers even in tough times. Meanwhile, those associated with high prices and questionable long-term value are struggling to justify their place in an increasingly cautious market. Prestige alone no longer moves metal. Dealers, aware of the optics, are resorting to subtle tactics to disguise the stagnation. Cars are rotated across the lot, shuffled into new formations, and polished to a shine in an effort to convince visitors that inventory is moving. But beneath the surface, the reality is unavoidable. Time is the enemy. Every day a car sits unsold, its value declines while the dealer's financial burden grows heavier. The frozen lot phenomenon isn't just an image problem. It's a financial time bomb. Cars aren't paid for in cash. They're financed through floor plan loans, which means every unmoved vehicle is accruing interest like a ticking meter. In the past, inventory turned quickly enough for these costs to stay manageable. Now, with hundreds of days' worth of unsold cars clogging lots, the burden is crushing. The eerie stillness on many lots is more than just an inconvenience. It's the visual representation of an industry in gridlock. And that immobility comes with a steep price, one that's beginning to push even established dealers into crisis mode. For most consumers, it's easy to think of dealership inventory as just sitting there, waiting for the right buyer. But behind the scenes, every vehicle on a lot is a financial liability. Dealerships don't buy cars outright with idle cash. They rely on floor plan financing, a system where lenders provide credit lines to cover inventory. Each car becomes collateral, and each day it sits unsold, interest accumulates. In a healthy market, this isn't a problem. Vehicles move fast enough that the carrying cost is manageable. But when inventory stalls, 400 days on certain models in some cases, the financial weight becomes unbearable. Dealers are effectively paying rent on cars that are depreciating in value while generating zero income. This squeeze ripples through the entire operation. Profit margins on new car sales are already razor thin, often less than a few percent. Add in mounting interest on stagnant inventory, and those margins evaporate. Cash flow dries up, making it harder to pay staff, maintain facilities, or invest in marketing. Deferred upkeep on lots, postponed technology upgrades, and even delayed payroll become increasingly common as dealers scramble to conserve cash. The math is brutal. Imagine a mid-sized dealer with 500 vehicles on the lot. Each car accrues $10 per day in financing costs. Multiply that across the entire inventory for months on end, and the bill runs into millions. And that's before factoring in depreciation, which eats into potential resale value the longer a car sits unsold. For smaller dealerships, the crisis is existential. Many are family-owned businesses that have survived for decades by carefully balancing modest profits with steady turnover. But in this environment, even a single miscalculation, over-ordering a model that doesn't sell, or failing to move slow inventory fast enough, can push them toward insolvency. Larger groups with diversified portfolios fare better, but even they aren't immune. With certain brands moving and others stuck, cash flow becomes uneven and unpredictable. The strain also affects relationships with lenders. Banks and specialty finance companies are growing cautious. When they see inventory piling up, they tighten credit lines or increase rates, compounding the pressure on dealers. Some lenders have begun quietly reassessing the viability of dealership financing altogether, worrying that defaults could rise if the gridlock continues. This vicious cycle leaves many dealers trapped. They can't sell fast enough to ease the burden, but they also can't walk away from their obligations. Every unsold vehicle is a reminder of shrinking margins and rising risk. The cost of standing still isn't just financial, it's psychological. Owners and managers who once ran bustling lots now walk through rows of idle cars, each one a reminder of the slow bleed they can't escape. And in an effort to break free, many have turned to desperate measures, slashing prices, cutting deals, and offering incentives that were once unthinkable. With lots overflowing and financing costs piling up, many dealers have reached the same conclusion. Better to lose money on a sale today than to bleed cash endlessly tomorrow. That calculation has triggered a wave of desperate discounting across the country. Customers walking into certain dealerships today are encountering deals that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. Thousands of dollars shaved off MSRP, low-interest financing paired with extended loan terms, and generous trade-in allowances have become common, particularly for slow-moving models. For buyers, it can feel like an unexpected windfall. For dealers, it's an act of survival. Salespeople who once stood firm on pricing are now volunteering numbers before negotiations even begin. Managers who previously clung to slim margins are approving deals that barely break even, or even lose money, just to clear space. The logic is simple. Holding on to unsold inventory for another month costs more than cutting it loose at a discount. In some cases, the desperation goes further. Vehicles are being sold in bulk through fleet sales or pushed into auction channels at reduced prices, simply to get them off the books. While these moves help dealers generate quick cash flow, they also erode overall market value. Too many discounted cars hitting the market can drag down resale prices across entire segments, creating ripple effects for consumers who bought at full price just months earlier. This wave of discounting also reveals how fragile the dealership model has become. In the past, dealers could rely on steady demand and geographic exclusivity to maintain pricing power. Today, with transparency tools allowing consumers to compare offers instantly, the pressure to cut deals is relentless. If one dealer slashes prices, competitors nearby often feel forced to follow suit, creating a race to the bottom that hurts everyone. For consumers, the situation is both opportunity and risk. On the one hand, buyers can access deals that might save them thousands. On the other, these discounts are signals of deeper instability. A dealer willing to sell at a loss isn't celebrating. It's fighting to stay afloat. If closures or consolidations follow, customers may face reduced access to service, warranty work, or parts availability down the line. The desperation on dealership lots is a visible symptom of the industry's broader unraveling. Each discount isn't just a promotion, it's a cry for help, a sign that the traditional balance between supply, demand, and profit has broken. But while discounts may buy time, they don't solve the structural problems plaguing the industry. As more dealers slash prices to survive, attention is shifting to a different model altogether, one that bypasses dealerships entirely and seems designed for exactly this moment. While traditional dealerships wrestle with unsold inventory and collapsing margins, one company's strategy looks prescient: Tesla. From the start, Tesla chose to bypass franchise dealers entirely, selling directly to customers through its own showrooms and online platforms. At the time, critics dismissed it as reckless. Conventional wisdom said legacy brands couldn't afford to alienate dealer networks that held enormous political power. But today, Tesla's model looks like a blueprint for the future. By owning the sales process, Tesla avoids many of the pitfalls now dragging traditional dealers into crisis. Inventory is managed centrally, pricing is adjusted instantly, and there are no hidden add-ons or junk fees for regulators to scrutinize. When Tesla cuts prices, it happens across the entire market at once. When it raises them, the same applies. There's no patchwork of dealers negotiating margins or holding unsold cars for months. This agility has allowed Tesla to weather fluctuations more smoothly than its rivals. While some legacy dealers now face 400 days of inventory, Tesla can redirect cars between markets, throttle production, or even use software updates to add value to vehicles already sold. In an industry struggling with stagnation, Tesla's dynamism looks revolutionary. Other automakers are paying attention. Direct sales for legacy brands once seemed impossible due to franchise laws, but the tide is shifting. Manufacturers like Ford and GM are experimenting with online-only special editions, pilot programs for EV sales, and even pop-up stores controlled directly by the manufacturer. Electric vehicles, in particular, are at the centre of this trend. With fewer moving parts and higher margins, EVs are easier to sell directly, cutting dealers out of the loop. The implications are profound. If legacy automakers adopt direct sales at scale, the traditional dealership model could unravel completely. Dealers would lose not just margin, but their role as gatekeepers of supply. Manufacturers, hungry to control pricing, customer data, and service relationships, would be free to dictate terms directly to buyers. For dealerships, this isn't just a threat, it's an existential question. If Tesla's model becomes the industry standard, many of them may have no role at all in the future of car buying. The struggles of dealerships don't stop at the lot. When a dealership falters, the ripple effects spread across entire communities. Salespeople see shrinking commissions. Service technicians lose hours as fewer cars flow through warranty programs. Administrative staff get cut as payroll tightens. For many employees, a job once seen as stable and upwardly mobile has become precarious overnight. The local economy feels it too. Dealerships are often among the biggest employers in small towns. They sponsor youth sports teams, fund community events, and contribute to tax bases that support schools and infrastructure. When they close, the impact is immediate and painful. A single closure can mean dozens of jobs lost, and when you include suppliers, like parts distributors, cleaning crews, and marketing agencies, the real number of affected workers can double or triple. Meanwhile, lenders and financial institutions are reassessing their exposure. Floor plan financing relies on steady turnover. When that slows, repayment timelines stretch and defaults loom. Some banks are quietly tightening credit standards, raising rates, or even reducing lines of credit altogether. Suppliers, from local advertising firms to regional parts wholesalers, are also taking hits as dealerships slash budgets to conserve cash. But while small towns and local economies suffer, Wall Street sees opportunity. Private equity firms flush with cash are circling distressed dealership groups, hoping to consolidate operations and streamline costs. By acquiring struggling players at bargain prices, they can create leaner, more digitally integrated chains that may survive the transparency era. Stock markets are already reflecting this divide. Publicly traded dealership groups with exposure to struggling brands are seeing sharp declines. Stronger groups with more resilient portfolios are holding up better, but the gap is widening. For investors, the shakeout is a chance to profit. For workers and towns, it's a looming disaster. This dual reality, collapse on Main Street, opportunity on Wall Street, underscores just how disruptive the current crisis has become. The dealership meltdown isn't just an automotive story, it's an economic one, reshaping communities, finance, and employment. For consumers, the dealership crisis presents a paradox. On the surface, it looks like a buyer's market. Discounts are everywhere. Financing offers are aggressive. Trade-in values are more negotiable than they've been in years. For those ready to buy, the deals can feel extraordinary. But beneath the surface, there are risks. As dealerships consolidate or close, access to service shrinks. A buyer who gets a bargain on a new vehicle today may find themselves driving 2 hours for warranty work tomorrow. Manufacturers may hand service to third-party networks, but consistency and convenience are never guaranteed. Resale value is another danger. When discounted vehicles flood the market, used car prices fall. Buyers who thought they scored a deal may discover that their car is worth far less when it comes to time to sell. This risk is especially pronounced in brands tied to struggling dealerships. A luxury sedan bought at half price may prove impossible to resell at a reasonable value later. And then there's the broader question. If direct sales take hold, will buyers lose or gain? On one hand, transparency and nationwide pricing could end haggling once and for all. On the other, it could also mean less competition between sellers, fewer localized deals, and less leverage for consumers. At this crossroads, buyers must weigh short-term bargains against long-term consequences. A low price today might mean fewer options, weaker service, and diminished resale value tomorrow. The dealership crisis is reshaping not just the industry, but the entire car buying experience, forcing consumers to think more strategically about when and where to make their move. What's happening in America's dealerships isn't just an automotive story, it's a lens into something bigger, the decline of traditional middlemen across the economy. From real estate agents challenged by online platforms, to department stores bypassed by direct-to-consumer brands, to healthcare providers disrupted by telemedicine, industries that once thrived on controlling information are being forced into transparency. Car dealerships, with their hidden fees, opaque financing, and entrenched franchise protections, were among the most fortified middlemen in America. Yet even they are now vulnerable. Transparency mandates, state crackdowns, and consumer anger have pulled down the walls. Direct sales and digital platforms are showing there are other ways forward. For consumers, the changes may bring both opportunity and risk. For communities, they may mean painful disruption. And for the industry, they pose an existential question: adapt or vanish. The sight of gleaming cars gathering dust on dealership lots is more than just an economic anomaly. It's a symbol of an era ending, a reminder that no system built on opacity can survive in a world demanding transparency. The next chapter may not be written in the showrooms of today, but in the digital platforms and direct-to-consumer models shaping tomorrow. Because this isn't just the story of dealerships collapsing, it's the story of how power in America shifts, away from middlemen and toward consumers armed with information. And if that shift can dismantle something as entrenched as the dealership model, it's only a matter of time before other industries face the same reckoning. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.